It began, as all great stories do, with words. Around 999 Common Era, after 30 years of work, the great Persian poet Abul Qasim Ferdowsi completed a compilation of stories that would come to be known as the Shahnama, or Book of Kings. These stories, in their soaring beauty, told the national epic of Iran, covering both its mythical and historical past, from the creation of the world to the 7th century. One of the longest ever epic poems, it contained between 30,000 and 60,000 rhyming couplets, and is firmly embedded in Persian culture as a literary masterpiece, whose rich tales capture the hearts of its readers by telling of joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, the earthly and the divine. These stories were passed down and preserved throughout the centuries and illustrated in manuscripts commissioned by a variety of rulers. One such ruler was Abul Sa'id, a Mongol leader during the Ilkhanid dynasty, under whom the arts of the book became a major focus and Chinese motifs were integrated into visual culture. This can be seen in Iskander and the Talking Tree, produced in 1330. The manuscript depicts famed conqueror Iskander, known throughout the Western world as Alexander the Great, at the end of the world encountering a talking tree with both a male and female head. In the Shahnama story, the male head, which speaks during the day, warns Iskander that he must abdicate his throne. The female head, who whispers sweetly into the nighttime, tells him to resist greed, but also prophesies his imminent death in a strange land. Both faces are rendered clearly through ink, opaque watercolour and gold on paper. In visualising this powerful story, the artist, whose identity remains unknown, clearly demonstrates the Ilkhanid style of illustration by borrowing elements from Chinese pictorial art, such as the rolling rocks and vegetation. However, the doom-filled prophecies illustrated in the manuscript would prove an omen for its commissioner, Abul Sa'id. 5 years after its completion, he died without an heir, diluting the power of the Ilkhan dynasty and plunging the region into 50 years of conflict, as various forces contended for authority, each with their own visions of religion and societal structure. But the ambitions of all these would-be leaders were crushed under the brutal force of conqueror Timur, who invaded the region in 1380, ushering in a deadly reign of terror. Following his death, the people of Iran endured numerous regime changes and conflicts, but throughout centuries of bloodshed, the Shahnama stories persisted. Under each new leader, people continued to tell Ferdowsi's tales, drawing comfort from the epic victories and defeats of their forefathers. That link to the past never dimmed, and the tales resonated afresh with each generation. Finally, in 1501, the Timurid dynasty fell, and Persia was conquered by the Safavids, who brought a renewed interest in manuscripts. It was in this environment that artist Sultan Muhammad, a master of the Akhonul Turkmens, was inspired by the power of the Shahnama stories and illustrated Rustam and Rashk outside the lion's den. Rustam, a famous warrior, was travelling with his trusty horse Rashk, and as the evening drew closer, they decided to rest. In Sultan Muhammad's illustration, they were in a densely foreboding forest where snakes attack birds' nests and strange faces loom out of the rocks. However, Rustam was unaware they had camped outside a lion's lair, and while he slept, the creature came out to attack. Rashk bravely fought it off, eventually trampling it to death with his hooves, as depicted in the bottom foreground. At 20 by 30 centimetres, this manuscript is comparatively small, but great expense is evident in the gold leaf application to the sky. It is an example of Sultan Muhammad's early illustration style, using the rich colouring and suggestion of depth through stamped figures, characteristic of the Tabrid school. This style would shift dramatically over the next 10 years as a result of Safavid intervention. Sultan Muhammad's city Tabriz was conquered in 1501 and became the Safavid capital, but the dynasty would continue to conquer, taking the city of Herat in 1510. Safavids then intentionally brought Herat's artists and craftsmen back to Tabriz to influence its artists and fuse their traditions of composition and illustration, creating a new style that could be easily identifiable as Safavid. By 1525, Sultan Muhammad had shifted to this fused Safavid style, as evidenced in his work The Feast of Sada. This folio was much larger at 32 by 48 centimetres and was eventually included in the Shahnama of Safavid ruler Shah Tahmasp, arguably one of the most richly and luxuriously illustrated copies in Persian history. In this scene, legendary leader Hushang, second ruler of the world, is throwing a feast to celebrate having just discovered fire. While throwing a flint rock to scare away a venomous serpent, Hushang noticed how it sparked against another flint to create fire, a discovery he shared with his people. This work, with its gold-sprinkled border and ornately divided Nastaliq script, is a testament to the beauty of Persian illustration, as well as the longevity of the stories of the Shahnama. They persisted throughout centuries and resonated with a variety of artists, leaders, and viewers. And although the stories themselves have remained largely unchanged, these three works demonstrate the changes in how they were visualized in different periods of Persian painting. Where the Iskander piece is richly toned and dominated by a bold blue sky, the Rustam work uses a dark colour scheme and lots of green, evoking the menacing feeling of the forest, overseen by a golden sky. The Feast of Sada then reverts back to the blue sky with a lighter, vivid colour scheme which suggests to the viewer the joyous atmosphere of celebration. Interestingly, while the Sada work remains faithful to its source text, the artist took creative liberties in both the Iskander and Rustam pieces, with the Ilkhan artist changing the Shahnama's original description of animal bones and skin to rocks and vegetation, while Sultan Muhammad changed the scene of his work from the described meadow to a forest. Despite the many changes between these works historically, politically, visually, and stylistically, when considered together they serve as a testament to the value of storytelling and the continued cultural significance of the Shahnama. By immortalizing its stories in manuscript illustrations, artists have added to its history and enriched our understanding of its continued importance to Persian culture.